Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Austin Sheridan, and tonight's guest we have William Duguid from one of our guest campaigners. How are you tonight, William?
Fine, thank you, Austin. I greet you, and so does Perth and Kinross Yes Hub, which
Yes,
I do
perfect.
represent.
Yes, I'm fantastic. And I say this is my second time presenting, and the first time I presented, William was our guest. So I'm glad to have you back again, William. You were very kind to me the last time, so so I know we're going to have a good show tonight.
Great stuff.
Excellent. What we'll do is we'll go for the Ukraine update. This is day 100, day 905. Russia is urgently advertising for trench diggers to build defence in the Kursk region because of Ukraine's surprise invasion, according to reports. Ads call for labourers and general workers with no experience, but also excavator operators, and promise they will work with the outside the combat zone with no danger. The Institute for the Study of War cites satellite images have said Russia is hurriedly trying to fortify a line 10 miles away from the Ukrainian front line in Kursk. The UN the UN Human Rights Office said it has asked Moscow to let it visit Russian regions affected by Ukraine's cross-border campaign. The office has previously asked Russia repeatedly for access to both Russian territory to Ukrainian territories under Russia's control. To no avail, said Liz Frossel, a spokesperson of the OHCHR. In contrast, Ukraine has said it will open humanitarian corridors for evacuating civilians towards both Russia and Ukraine. And Russian officials have promised access for international humanitarian organisations like the International Committee of the Red Cross and UN. Colonel General Alexander Syrskyi, the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, said Ukraine has set up a military commandment's office in occupied Kursk. We are now moving forward and in the Kursk region. A military commandment's office has been created which must ensure order and also the needs of the local population, Syrskyi said, adding that the office would be headed by Major General Edward Mozavko. On Thursday, Russia said that its forces had taken control of Invanaka, 16 kilometres from Provrisk. It was reported by Reuters, which said it could not be independently verified claim, but said Ukraine had reported in the heaviest fighting in weeks near Prosovisk. Ukraine's Special Armed Forces captured a group of more than 100 Russian soldiers in Kursk. The Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, said on Thursday, adding that Ukrainian forces also took over the sprawling concrete and well-fortified company stronghold. The 102 servicemen of Russia's 488th Guards Motorised Rifle Regiment and its Akhmat unit, and the largest group of soldiers to be captured at the same time since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. According to the SBU, pictures showed dozens of Russian servicemen sitting or laying on the ground in a concrete bunker with their helmets and weapons piled up near the walls. The prisoners would eventually be swapped for Ukrainian prisoners of war, the SBU said. The Israel-Gaza latest, at least 40,005 Palestinians have been killed. Oh, sorry, apologies. We'll come back to discuss Ukraine with yourself, William.
Oh,
So obviously
right.
that is the latest update that you've heard there. So what is it you make of what's happening? Do you feel that there's enough progress being made on the Ukrainian side? Do you think that Russia's in the back foot here?
Well, the story of the last week or so has been the Russian incursion into the Kursk region, which sorry, Ukrainian incursion. I don't know if I said Russian. I'm losing my mind already. Um, so that has been the big story of the week, and it's certainly a morale boost for Ukraine. At the same time, there are other things happening in the world which aren't so good for Ukraine, including around Pokrovsk, where there are significant incursions by Russia, about a kilometre a day. So it's still a very, very difficult situation to predict, and one is seeing now Russia beginning to react to Ukraine's incursion with its trench digging and presumably by diverting a number of military folk to the area, which again will perhaps affect things elsewhere. So it's really still a very uncertain situation. I would say that Ukraine is currently winning the propaganda war with its talk of humanitarian corridors, etc. Russia, meanwhile, is saying that Ukraine's incursion brings everything closer to all-out global war, which seems to me to be a wee bit of hyperbole. But I do expect Russia to fight back, and again, it's I think probably advantageous for Ukraine to have some bargaining counters if it is to hold on to Kursk. Therefore, we have something that can be negotiated at some point. Because as I keep referring back to whenever I talk about this war, at the moment I don't see a way out of it. And there needs to be a negotiation that is fairly just and does not result in certainly Ukraine losing a whole batch of territory as the country that was invaded in the first place. So it's another wait and see, and we'll probably be having another look at it next time I'm on, and I'll probably be saying much the same thing. Maybe not about Kursk, but about whatever else is going on at that time. Very difficult to predict.
It is very difficult to predict. Thank you much for that. And then we'll move on to the Israel-Gaza latest. So at least 40,005 Palestinians have been killed and 92,401 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to a statement from the Gazan Health Ministry. Gaza ceasefire talks in Doha were pursued today, with negotiators set to meet again next week. A joint statement from Egypt, Qatar and the United States said that the US today presented a Gaza ceasefire proposal that closes the remaining gaps in a manner that allows for the rapid implementation of the agreement and is consistent with the principles set out by President Joe Biden on May the 31st. Foreign Secretary David Lammy and French Foreign Minister Stephanie Sheridan, in a joint statement after meeting the Israeli counterparts, said to have been told they hope they are on the cusp of a deal to bring the conflict to an end. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has called the armed collective attack by settlers on the village of Jit in the occupied West Bank organised state terrorism in a statement. Israeli leaders also condemned the attack in what was a rare move. The office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights spokesperson, Ravana Shamdasani, has described an attack by Israeli settlers on the village of Jit Thursday, which left a Palestinian man dead and about a dozen injured in the incident, as horrific, echoing widespread international condemnation of the attack. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture on Friday condemned what she called a particularly gruesome case of the alleged sexual abuse of a Palestinian prisoner by Israeli soldiers and said that the perpetrators of such crimes must be held accountable. So some pretty awful stuff coming out there as well, William, as you've heard. But how close do you think we are to a ceasefire? And do you think that do you think we're going to see movement on this anytime soon?
Well, there's certainly hopes of it. If it's true that Qatar and the US have come up with proposals that fit or even better what Joe Biden was looking at on May the 31st, that's at face value hopeful, because it means that talks can proceed. We still haven't heard exactly what Hamas has to say about it, because very often the thing is sort of set up that the proposals are made and actually they're not that beneficial to Hamas, and Hamas, for perfectly good reasons, doesn't like them very much. And then Hamas are made out to be the villains who don't really want peace at all. Whereas Israel very frequently has not been a great proponent of peace talks. I would like to see actual constructive peace talks happen, because this has gone on long enough. And if anything is going to defuse the tensions in the Middle East, generally, it's going to be constructive peace talks that I think do result in the return of hostages. I don't think really there's any point in Hamas having hostages anymore. It's not done them any good. And there needs to be now a peace deal that actually promotes peace, so that the handing back of the hostages isn't simply a prelude to more violence. Um, the interesting story of the day, although it's just one of many sequential ones about this particular area, is of course the attacks in Jit on the West Bank, which is
Yeah.
just one of a series of settler attacks that have been happening not just over the last few months, but fairly consistently um, over the last decades, really. Perhaps they've intensified a little bit as settlers have become emboldened. If it's true that Israel has even condemned this attack, that is an interesting move because they've not been minded to do so in the past. So it'll be interesting to see if that one develops any further, because it's one of the things. Settler violence generally is one of the things that's got to stop if there's going to be any hope of long-term peace in this region, slim as it may be.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. And now we're going to move on to our next story, which I'm sure will be very topical for you, William, which is the Scottish Tory leadership contest in disarray. The Scottish Conservative leadership contest has been thrown into disarray after 4 of the 6 candidates called for it to be paused, aimed allegations about manoeuvring by Douglas Ross to step down as leader a year earlier. Murdo Fraser, Liam Kerr, Jamie Green and Brian Whittle have all signed a joint letter to the Scottish Conservatives Management Board raising concerns about reports in the Daily Telegraph which say that Ross had tried to quit as party leader in 2023 and have Russell Finlay installed as his replacement. It's alleged that Ross tried to persuade Murray Council leader Kathleen Robertson to stand aside as the candidate to allow him to run for the new Westminster seat, which was Murray West, Nairn and Strathspey, despite Douglas Ross was insisting publicly that he would not stand for Westminster and focusing on his role at Holyrood instead. The criticism following his decision to force David Duguid at the July general election led to his humiliating resignation in the middle of the election campaign. Finlay, who is seen as one of the favourites to take over from Ross, and Megan Gallagher, the current deputy leader, are the only 2 standing in the contest who did not sign the statement raising concerns about the outgoing leader's conduct. Following the revelations about the conduct of Douglas Ross in the Telegraph, Megan Gallagher has today resigned as the deputy party leader. So David. Oh, sorry, apologies, William. So as we can see, there's some more disarray coming out there. What do you make of this? Especially when you think things couldn't get any worse for the Tories in the leadership contest. It seems to be that nothing seems to surprise us. What is it you think of it all, William?
Um, well, obviously, I don't really have a dog in the game, despite the fact that I share a surname with one of the people you just mentioned, who, of course, was the candidate that Douglas Ross actually succeeded in supplanting in Aberdeenshire North and Murray East. Not to his great advantage, because even his local activists, I think, wouldn't really work for him. They saw what he was up to, pulling strings, pulling rank, and basically edging aside a candidate, claiming he was too sick to stand when the candidate himself did not. I think that was um, I think it was pretty objectionable conduct, and he got what he deserved in the election. I suspect he might have got what he deserved if he'd elbowed aside Kathleen Robertson, if that's indeed what happened. Needless to say, Douglas Ross's story of the thing is different. He apparently um, invited Kathleen Robertson to his house just to check she was committed to the seat, which is really sweet, but I don't believe it for a nanosecond. And behind all of this, there's just thoughts about whether um, Douglas Ross perhaps is involved in a scheme to try and crown Russell Finlay as leader without perhaps much need for an election. And that's why it's affected the actual election process, with 4 out of the 6 candidates writing their letter. And indeed, Megan Gallagher, the only other candidate who isn't Russell Findlay, now resigning as deputy. So, yeah, it's a mess. Um, for what it's worth, I suspect Russell Finlay is the most competent candidate. I'm not really qualified to judge Tories on grounds of competence, but nevertheless, I suspect he may well be. And it will be interesting to see how this one plays out. But it doesn't look as if Douglas Ross is going to have many um, appealing words written about him when the history of this few years of his leadership is finally written. I'm sure that'll be a bestseller, or
I
maybe
mean,
not.
I mean, the question is as well. So the deputy leaders resigned, all right. So I mean, after asking for it to be suspended, right? But the problem is with Douglas Ross. I don't think they've been very clear on whether they would be keeping Douglas Ross as their temporary leader, which then wouldn't seem to resolve the problem. And if they've not got a deputy leader, they would probably have a squabble about who would temporarily lead the whole of the group anyway. In the meantime, so it just seems to be a very complicated state of affairs, doesn't it?
Did you ever think that when you were dealing with the Tories, you felt the need to cry out, make it make sense? There is a bit of a deadline going on because nominations have to be in by next Thursday, apparently, and they have to have, each candidate has to have the support of 100 um, uh, party members. And that may be, if there's a big squabble going on, maybe that won't be very easy to get hold of. So I don't know if the competition will actually be suspended, but it's for sure that there's going to be some bad blood for a wee while, and that party really needs to look out for itself and maybe just pull itself together again a wee bit. Even in Holyrood, they've been better than this. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel almost weird saying that. Looking back to the likes of Annabel Goldie, it looks like a golden age now. I hesitate to say Ruth Davidson was part of the golden age, but Annabel Goldie possibly was. This is a million miles from that, and they really need
Yeah.
to sort it out.
Although, the interesting thing at this, just before we move on, I did see today that Douglas Ross did tell us that the Tories will announce their membership figures before the election. So obviously he refused to do so in the Scottish Parliament when he was questioning Nicola Sturgeon regarding SNP members. So I think we're all going to be looking forward to seeing the actual numbers of the Scottish Tories.
I don't think it's going to trouble many calculators, to be honest.
Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll move on to some more stuff that's been happening at Holyrood. So, criticism of Angus Robertson continues as a petition calling for his resignation approaches 1,000 signatures. Pressure's grown on Angus Robertson over his meeting with the Israeli Deputy Ambassador as a petition calling for him to resign reaches 1,000 signatories. Further reports of disquiet within the SNP emerged today as details of a letter from all of the SNP MPs was leaked to the media. Now, the SNP National Secretary, Lorna Flynn, posted on Twitter saying, "This appointment doesn't begin to cover how I feel about a minister and backbench MSP from my party meeting Israel's Deputy Ambassador. In the midst of a genocide, it is unconscionable and lends legitimacy to the actions of Netanyahu's government. Regardless of the intent, the pictures speak 1,000 words. Language and tone used in tweets around what Israeli hopes to achieve in Gaza is deeply troubling. I hope much soul searching is going on today at all levels." So William, yeah, there is obviously kind of a lot of discontent within the SNP. Now I had a little look. John Swinney, the First Minister, did come to Angus Robertson's defence. He said that part of that meeting was to make clear the Scottish Government's unequivocal demand of a ceasefire. However, when you look at the tweets, they speak about cooperation between the Scottish Government and the Israeli Government, around different industries, and then obviously John Mason, who's a backbench MSP, by the way, he spoke about what Israel looks to achieve in Gaza, which for a lot of people would seem obvious. What do you make of this, William? Do you think that Angus Robertson's in trouble?
Yes, I think he is. The reason I think he is because this isn't going away and it's getting worse. And for your entire group of MPs to be up in arms about it, for the secretary of the party, Lorna Finn, to be complaining about it, for all sorts of other voices who wouldn't normally raise the roof over this, also be discontented. If I talk every day to some SNP members who are in the hub, they're not happy with it. This is not going down well at all. Now, there may have been a case for Angus Robertson to be speaking to the Israeli deputy ambassador. That's fine. But so principally, I would think this is utterly a failure of news management on the part of the SNP, because um, basically the meeting was outed and can now be said to have been a secret meeting, because the first we knew about it was when Daniela Grudzki herself mentioned it on social media. It should have been trailed in advance by the Scottish Government that the meeting was taking place, and it should have been set out clearly why it was taking place, and that should have been done in the context of trying to um, trying to make the point about what's going on in Gaza, a point that's already been made by the SNP, particularly in the days of Hamza Yousaf, and
Yeah.
being in line with that. Not to have done so now lays them open to hypocrisy the next time they do complain about what's going on in Gaza. And it's just very, very bad news management. And there was a time when the SNP were expert at news management. I'm thinking back to the days of Kevin Pringle and others. They knew what they were doing. Now, I don't get the impression that they have any idea about how to get their story, their narrative across, and they're constantly being caught on the wrong foot.
I
And that's
mean,
exactly where you don't want to be right now.
I mean that's a good point, William. Right. So just on that, right? Do you think that because of how the strong opposition to what's been going on, you know, towards Israel from the SNP group in Westminster, then Angus Robertson meets with the deputy ambassador. The deputy ambassador then is the person that reveals the meeting, puts out a tweet. Do you think that there's potential that the deputy ambassador has actually spun this in her own way to actually potentially damage the SNP because of the SNP's opposition to Israel's actions? Do you think that that's
I'm not.
possible?
Well, she certainly spun it her way. Whether it was specifically to damage the SNP, I don't know. I think it's more along the lines of, look, we've collected another government that we're in conversation with, so we've got friends. I mean, Dalina Grudzki doesn't care whether the SNP's in power in Scotland or not. She wants really to undermine not so much the party, but the narrative that they've been able to quite rightly put up till now, and now they're hamstrung in doing it. In electoral terms, also, I would add, increasingly people will say, well, what's the difference between you and Labour now? And that's another problem for them with 2026 in prospect.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, William. Now we'll move on, to our next topic of conversation. The UK contaminated blood scandal victims call UK government offer of £15,000 to be basically, apologies, to be derisory. The UK government has confirmed that the victims of the UK contaminated blood scandal will begin receiving compensation before the end of the year, and some people will be entitled to more than 2.5 million, an outline of the long-awaited compensation scheme that was set out in May. After the final report of the inflicted blood inquiry laid bare by what Rishi Sunak, the then UK Prime Minister, called a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. More than 3,000 people died and many more have had their lives ruined because of diseases such as HIV and hepatitis C caused by infusions or contaminated blood given between the 1970s and 1990s. Campaigners spent decades urging successive UK governments to take responsibility and compensate victims and their families. The UK government is expected to introduce regulations set up by the new scheme by the 24th of August, allowing survivors who were infected to start receiving payments before the end of the year. For those who have already died, payments will be made to their estates. A second set of regulations covering victims' families and other affected will follow in the coming months, with payments for these individuals to be made starting in 2025. In a statement, Kate Burke, the chief executive of the Haemophilia Society, said, "We welcome the fact that the government have said that support schemes will continue for life, because people were worried about security, not only for the infected but for the bereaved as well." The UK government offered a £15,000 compensation to some victims of the infected blood scandal has been described as kicking the teeth by one of those affected. Under changes to a multi-billion pound compensation scheme announced by the UK government, victims of the infected blood scandal can receive support for life. Those who were used for research without their knowledge will also be eligible for an extra £10,000, with a higher award of £15,000 for those who underwent treatment as children at the Lordsmere at the Lordsmere Trailer College in Alton, Hampshire. Richard Warwick, who was infected with HIV, hepatitis B and hepatitis C after receiving blood products at the school, a specialist institution for children with haemophilia, as part of the medical treatment, told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that the £15,000 figure was this rate, and the government seemed to have plucked the amount out of the air. So, William, what is it you make of that, and do you agree with the sentiments that have been expressed there?
Well, I have sympathy for the sentiments for anybody who's suffered, and particularly the people who, as children, were really they suffered an egregious breach of trust in what went on at the Lord Mayor Treloar College, which was supposed to be the specialist place that could help them at a time when clinicians knew damn fine what the problem was with the blood, but carried on anyway. In terms of the government having plucked the figure out the air, that's slightly unfair because it was the recommendation of the Robert Francis, the barrister and chair of the Compensation Authority. It was a recommendation to government that there should be, on top of the compensation that everybody gets, there should be particular payments for people who'd been experimented on, and also for the group that had been at Lord Mayor Treloar College. And £10,000 and £15,000 respectively was the additional amount that was cited. Whether it is actually something that properly recognised what was done to them is up for debate, and I have every sympathy with Richard Warwick, who is the particular complainant in this case, saying that it's a kick in the teeth. But not totally fair to say that it's just been plucked out of the air. It is a recommendation, but I do think there are grounds for it being more, because it was really a particularly unethical episode in a generally not very savoury set of events. Final thing I would say is, why on earth are these people having to wait as long as 35 to 40 years for compensation? So typical of the way this kind of thing is done in the UK, and that needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah, because so many people, as you say, have passed away by the time a lot of these things are resolved, which is the most unfortunate thing regarding these things. What we'll do is we'll move on to our next topic, which has been big discussion as well. So, what will the UK public sector pay deals mean for Scotland? As senior Tories accuse Keir Starmer of losing control of public sector pay by arranging deals to end strikes, questions about how the pay increases will be paid for remain unclear. The deal to end the train strikes, which emerged on Wednesday, would include a backdated 5% increase for 2019 to 2022, 4.75 for 2022 to 2024, and a further 4.5% for 2024 to 2025. The train drivers' union Ashleaf has recommended its members accept the offer when they vote on it, which would end a 2-year-long dispute during which drivers have taken 18 days of strike action and refused to work non-contractual overtime. As the UK government says it will accept the recommendations of the public sector pay review bodies for above inflation pay rises in England and Wales, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has not set out clearly how this will be paid for. It is unknown how much, if any, will be new money and how much will have to be found within existing budgets, resulting in job losses, cutbacks and services. These UK government spending details have had a significant effect on the money available to the Scottish Government through Barnett consequentials. and the uncertainty has forced Finance Secretary Shona Robinson to put a halt on unnecessary public spending in Scotland until she knows what effect any UK government cuts will have on Scotland. So, William, essentially what we're being told there is that they're going to meet the demands, the recommendations, but they're not being very transparent about where this money is going to come from. So, William, do you think that that's going to then obviously put pressure on the Scottish Government, which could then lead to further cuts in Scotland? For example, we've seen what's happened with the winter fuel allowance.
Well, we don't know. That's the thing. It does put the statements made by Shona Robinson about public spending and reining it in terms of new expenditure in Scotland in a slightly different light. It was being cast by the BBC as really shoddy behaviour by the Scottish Government. But what else can they do when they don't know what their budget for things is actually going to be? It's all very well the UK government not being transparent about how things are going to be funded. And there are concerns for folk generally in England working in these services about whether it will be job losses and cutbacks. But that's nothing compared to the uncertainty that the Scottish government and indeed the Welsh government have got, because they're constantly forced to balance the budget and they're not able to borrow. And something comes along like this, and it turns out that it's from existing budgets, and you're not getting any more money, and then you have to change everything you've been doing. So I'm hoping that the announcement earlier this week from the Scottish Government was in anticipation of this kind of uncertainty and covering the Scottish Government's position, because I really wouldn't like there to be a situation where it turns out that there's even less money coming to the Scottish Government, and so they're going to have to make cuts to what's already happening, as well as not spending on new stuff. And all the time, the BBC and others protecting the position of Anas Sarwar as he attributes it to SNP mismanagement, which is a gross misrepresentation of the truth. So the answer is we don't know, and we'll find out, no doubt. And one thing I do hope, though, is that with the Labour government that's now in, the dialogue between them and the Scottish Government operates a bit more constructively than was the case under the Tories.
Mm-hmm.
The Tories were constantly whipping the carpet from under the Scottish Government. I want that to stop. And, if they're going to find out about what it means in terms of funding, let's have it done openly.
Because I totally agree, because because John Swinney said, when the Labour government came in, that it was going to be an opportunity to reset relationships with the UK government, and have dialogue and work closer together. But then things like the winter fuel payment, for example, Shona Robinson said, that was done without consultation with Scottish ministers. So I suppose that there is goodwill at the beginning of any new government. But I suppose, do you think, William, that goodwill could become, could be lost? And do you think that the UK government are going to be better now that it's under change, or do you think that we could potentially have more of the same?
It's difficult to tell. Too early in the relationship. I don't see how the relationship can actually be as bad as it was with the Tories latterly, but it needs to work better. I mean, I am not in favour of devolution long term, as you well know. I would much prefer to be making our own decisions, but I don't want the decisions that we are able to make to be constrained by all sorts of unexpected stuff going on. So I think there is room for a rapprochement on both sides, and I just hope that it happens, because we don't want there to be constant squabbling for the next few months.
Yeah, absolutely, William, and thanks so much for that. So we'll move on to our next topic, which is from across the pond. So a poll gives Kamala Harris a 3% lead over Trump in Pennsylvania. As ABC News announces that the first presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will be held in Philadelphia, the latest polling has shown that Kamala Harris has taken a 3-point lead over Trump in Pennsylvania. At Quinnipiac University, survey of likely voters found Harris is leading Donald Trump by 3 points in a head-to-head match-up with 50% support to his 47%. If third-party candidates are factored in, she is at 48% and the ex-president is at 45%. Winning Pennsylvania would give Harris a number of avenues to victory, including by carrying regional neighbours, Michigan and Wisconsin, and as well as Nebraska congressional district centred on Omaha. Donald Trump has been criticised after he claimed that the Civilian Presidential Medal of Freedom, which he bestowed on people, including Republican supporters and donors during his time in office, is much better than the top military award for those killed or wounded in action. The Medal of Honor, speaking at a campaign event on Thursday, Trump made the claim as he addressed William Olson, the widow of Republican mega donor Sheridan Olson. Trump awarded William Olson the Medal of Freedom in 2018. Kamala Harris's election campaign posted a video of Trump's remarks to X on Thursday, along with a paragraph which quoted former President Veteran Alexander Vindman, a retired lieutenant colonel in the US Army who testified during Trump's first impeachment investigation and was fired by the president. Quote posted Harris' campaign on X saying, Trump dishonours Medal of Honor recipients or national highest military award for distinguished acts of valor. He deserves nothing but disdain and disqualifies himself from public office. Trump also came in for ridicule on social media after saying that 100% of new jobs went to immigrants, adding that the real number was higher than that. So, William, what do you make of that? Do you think that Kamala Harris is closing the gap? Do you think she's in with a real chance of winning? Or do you think that there's a chance that Donald Trump could pull back the lead that he had while Joe Biden was the candidate?
I don't think that the Trump campaign has yet worked out how best to deal with Harris. They've tried to undermine the legitimacy of her candidacy, which doesn't seem to be working. It's undoubtedly the case that she's made a good start to the campaign, has made up pretty well, I think, all of the ground, or nearly all of the ground, that Biden had lost. And she needs to do that because it was a significant deficit. The three swing states that she seems to be ahead in now, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, you mentioned, they were all won by Biden in 2020. So she's got to carry those states. So it's good that she's in a decent position there, and slightly a better lead being cited in the most recent polls, not necessarily in all polls, but the most recent polls, slightly ahead of the margin of error. So it's potentially a genuine lead. What's also interesting is that she's polling very well amongst women. And I think that will actually be fairly significant as time goes on. Having said all of that, and taking into account that, as you recounted at some length there, Trump's havering is getting even more outlandish than normal. And in a sense, Kamala Harris is giving him enough rope to hang himself, I suppose, by just being able to post his remarks and then comment on them. There's going to be a backlash of some sort from the Trump campaign. We just don't know what it is yet. Interestingly, though, the first debate that's been arranged is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on September the 10th, and that might be a key moment. In some senses, perhaps Kamala Harris doesn't want to be too far ahead at that point, because if you go into a debate in the lead, then you maybe try to play it safe. I don't think Kamala Harris has anything to gain by playing it safe. She just has to go and try and win that debate and any others that follow quite significantly. And that will get her in a good position when it comes to the start of November. Then the real fun begins as we discover whether, if Trump loses, the result is in any way acceptable to him.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting stuff. We just have to watch, as time goes on. But it's certainly very interesting stuff indeed, and I look forward to hopefully watching that debate probably in the small hours in the morning. But we'll move on to our next topic, which is China adds new clean power equivalent to UK's entire electricity output. China added as much new clean energy generation in the first half of this year as the UK produced from all sources in the same period last year, data shows, as wind and solar power generation continued to surge in the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Electricity generation from coal and gas dropped by 5% in China in July, year on year, according to an update from the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air think tank based its analysis on data released by the Chinese government on Thursday. The latest figures reinforce a clear trend. China is racing ahead in renewable energy, adding record-breaking amounts of solar and wind generation, eclipsing the rest of the world. It is a transformation that analysts are saying could be the world's best hope yet of staving off the climate catastrophe. Last year, China installed a record 293 gigawatts of wind and solar generating capacity. Last month, solar and wind capacity outstripped China's coal-fired electricity capacity. By 2026, solar power alone will surpass coal as China's primary energy source, with a capacity of more than 1.3 MTW or 1.5 gigawatts. Or 150 gigawatts more than coal, according to the forecast by Rystad Energy. Electric vehicles production is surging ahead, with hybrids and fully electric cars making up more than half of all new models sold in July, and the steel industry is also changing, with no permits for coal-fired plants issued in the first half of this year. The continuing boom in clean technology has led to some analysts to suggest China's greenhouse gas emissions may have already reached a peak, perhaps as early as February this year. This would be momentous for China, the world's second biggest economy behind the US, to reverse its decades of almost unbroken rapid growth, nearly tripling from about 3.6 billion tonnes of carbon emitted in 2000 to 11.4 billion in 2022, would have systemic implications for the global climate emergency. So, William, do you believe that this is, some genuine good news from China, that they're really working hard to cut down their emissions, and do the rest of the world have lessons to learn from that as well?
Well, the rest of the world might be encouraged if China did cut down its emissions, because they are responsible for a quarter of global emissions. And the plan was for that to start to reverse by about 2030. So if it's come early, that's a good thing, and it does enhance the possibility of restricting the temperature growth globally to 1.5 degrees. And that would be a good thing, because there's some frightening things going on elsewhere in the climate debate right now, particularly the unexpectedly large jump in the global temperature last year. But with China, I mean, it's a huge and complex country, and it's still got a lot of coal-fired stuff going on, even if it's increasing the wind. And we have seen this before. Emissions from China dropped in 2014, only to jump up again in 2017 and keep going through the COVID pandemic. And there may be economic reasons why the emissions are slowing down now. Not least, the construction industry isn't doing so well, and there's a lot of cement, which is quite intensive in that area. The steel industry likewise. So it could be a blip, or it could be a real thing. And we'll have to wait and see. And COP29 will be particularly interesting. It comes just after the US election, which is another thing that makes that quite important. I think if Trump loses and Kamala Harris wins the US election, there'll be more pressure on China to do more of the same, because if that particular engine of emissions slows down and goes into reverse, then we might finally be onto something with climate change.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, William. So move on to our next topic, which is Brazil's President Lula criticises Maduro's authoritarian regime following Venezuelan election. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has said Venezuela is living under a very unpleasant regime with an authoritarian slant as the political crisis engulfing the oil-rich South American country intensifies before fresh street protests on Saturday. In an interview early today, Lula, whose diplomats have been exploring possible solutions to Venezuela's post-election drama, offered some of his sharpest criticism of Nicolas Maduro's Maduro's socialist administration yet. Maduro, who has governed since 2013, claimed he won a third term in the 28th of July vote, but has yet to provide proof, while his opposition rival Edmundo Gonzalez has published election data suggesting he was the actual winner. Speaking to Radio Gucha, Brazil's socialist president, who has not recognised Maduro's campaign to victory, said he had yet to see proof either side had won. Lula repeated Brazil's demand that Maduro's government publish the voting tally sheets before the result could be verified. Lula has a long-term friendship with the former Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez. And a sign that his patience with Maduro's is wearing thin over Maduro's failure to publish the data, Brazilian president made some of his most disapproving comments about the nature of Venezuela's current government. I think Venezuela is living under a very unpleasant regime, Lula said, adding that he did not, however, consider it a dictatorship. It is different to a dictatorship. It is a government with an authoritarian slant, but isn't a dictatorship, the likes of which we would know so many in this world, said Brazil's president. So, William, what do you make of what is happening in South America? Do you think that there's going to be some more trouble there, or do you think that things could be smoothed over with this kind of dialogue?
Well, this probably goes one of two ways, and one is that Maduro brazens it out and basically raises a finger to the world, because the fact that he can't provide any real evidence that he's won the election, whereas his opponent can provide evidence suggesting that he has, is probably here significant. An awful lot of what's talked about Venezuela is often framed in the light of American interests, but the fact that there's been pretty wide condemnation of Maduro, and particularly to the crackdown when there were protests about this election. So 20 killed and 1,400 detained. Marvellous. I think it's likely he'll try to brazen it out, because the alternative is extremely undesirable. It might be termed not the Nicaragua solution, which was the finger to the world, but a Romania solution, which is the people revolt, and that gets very unpleasant. And you don't really want instability in an oil-rich place like Venezuela with all those international interests around, because they tend to become involved, and that becomes very difficult indeed. It could be a very interesting situation for the next president of the US, for example.
Yeah. And thank you much for that, William. So now we're going to move on to our last topic of tonight's show, which is the Scottish National Investment Bank invests 10 million in Highland Broadband. The Scottish National Investment Bank has invested a further 10 million in Highland Broadband. The follow-on investment will enable the company, which services customers in communities across Scotland, to tackle digital inequality by expanding its delivery of ultra-fast broadband coverage. Highland Broadband, which is part of Lothian Broadband Networks Limited, estimates that around 500,000 premises across Scotland are still without access to gigabit-capable networks, and it plans to connect as many of those as possible over the next few years. The bank's latest investment will help the company make significant progress with providing connectivity to over 100,000 premises. The Scottish National Investment Bank initially provided cornerstone funding of 20 million to Highland Broadband in 2021, and a further 20 million in 2023, which has helped install gigabit-capable networks to areas of East Lothian, Stirlingshire, Fife and the Highlands, north of Inverness, as part of its latest phase. Highland Broadband began deploying further network throughout the Highlands across the Black Isle, Great Glen and Cairngorms. Gavin Rogers, CEO Highland Broadband, said The Highlands and Islands face unique connectivity challenges, but we view overcoming these barriers as essential for providing what should be basic services for everyone in Scotland. The Scottish National Investment Bank's continued support has enabled us to accelerate our plan to connect these regions, which ultimately helps reduce place-based inequality in areas such as education, employment and healthcare. Prior to starting work in 2015, less than 1% of premises from Inverness to the north of Scotland, the Black Isle, and on the east coast had access to gigabit capable network. The company's work has now improved that to around 80% and expects to reach 98% coverage by the end of the year. So William, is this good news for the Highland communities? I mean, especially areas where they're looking to retain young people and so on. So do you think that this is important for the economy and retention of people living in rural areas?
Yeah, absolutely it is. This sort of broadband service is something we take for granted now, those of us who've got it, but it'll have a real world impact for the Highland communities if we can get up to 98%. You can be sure that competing countries will have that sort of level and probably more. So we absolutely have to be operating at our highest. And it's in line with what the Scottish National Investment Bank is supposed to be doing. Its missions include addressing the climate campaign through growing fair and sustainable economy, scaling up innovation and technology. And technology, there you have it, and transforming communities. That's the other one. It'll do all of these things. And we don't get to hear enough about what the Scottish National Investment Bank is doing. And this is a good news story. It's committed 645 million quid to date. Perhaps a drop in the ocean with more to come, but it's certainly something. And it's good to see it making a difference. So I hope this is successful.
Brilliant, William. Thank you so much. And it's been great chatting to you today. But I do want you to hold on because I will come back to you. But we're now at 8 o'clock, and that is us for the evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donation if we are able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we are now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford, and it will be greatly appreciated. But thank you very much again to our guest, William Duguid. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. I say my second time that you've been a guest, and again, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've certainly enjoyed it, William, and I hope that you have too.
Well, so have I, apart from a certain loss of mind at the start, but that was all good. We got round that and it was fine. Loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. And again, thank you everyone for watching. Good night and goodbye.